Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to dive into a really fascinating and short period of the Cold War called detente. You've probably heard the term before, and you know it means things cooled down. But how, and maybe more importantly, why?
Exactly. Détente is actually a French word. It means a relaxation of tensions.
Mhm.
And we're talking about a very specific time here, from the late 1960s to the late 1970s. It's when the United States and the Soviet Union, deliberately took a step back from the edge. It was a huge, really uncomfortable, but absolutely essential shift in thinking.
And the big picture here isn't that they suddenly became friends. They were still intense rivals, capitalism versus communism, that didn't change. But they stopped acting like war could break out at any second. They kind of agreed to a set of rules because I guess the alternative was just global catastrophe.
That's our goal for today. We want to get into the mechanics of it. What forced these two superpowers to actually sit down and talk? What were the big agreements they signed to keep nuclear weapons in check? And then what was the one shocking event that made the whole thing fall apart?
Okay, so let's start with that fundamental question. After decades of threats, spy games, all of it, why did they suddenly decide to slow down?
Well, the first reason, and this one's bigger than anything else, was just the terrifying reality of nuclear weapons.
Mm.
By the late 1960s, both sides had enough bombs to, not just destroy each other, but to literally end civilization.
Right.
This idea that a direct war meant total mutual destruction. It forced them to look for another way, what they started calling peaceful coexistence.
That fear is a powerful motivator for sure. But there was also a lot of self-interest, right? This arms race was costing them both a fortune.
A crippling amount of money. Building new missiles, maintaining huge armies, it was breaking their national budgets.
And for the United States, you had the war in Vietnam going on, just unbelievably expensive, and it was tearing the country apart at home.
Absolutely. So you have the U.S. dealing with that, draining billions of dollars, dividing public opinion, running a global military, and fighting a huge war.
Yeah.
You just can't keep adding endless nuclear spending on top of that.
So what was the situation on the Soviet side? Were they feeling the same pinch?
Even more so. Their economic situation was desperate. Their whole agricultural system was failing.
Yeah.
They were struggling to produce enough food.
Wow.
And they badly needed access to Western technology. So for them, it wasn't just about stability. They needed American grain to literally feed their people.
So you have this perfect storm. The cost of fighting just got way too high, and the fear of nuclear war was overwhelming.
It pushed both Washington and Moscow toward trying to find some stability so they could, finally focus on their own problems for a change.
Okay, so with fear and empty pockets pushing them to the table, where did they start? That has to be the strategic arms limitation talks, right?
SALT.
Exactly. So
Clearly.
there's a whole series of meetings designed to do one thing: limit the number of long-range nuclear missiles each country could have.
So the goal wasn't getting rid of them.
No, not at all. Not yet. The goal was control.
Yeah.
To stop the expensive treadmill of they built a new missile, so now we have to build one. And the first one, SALT-E, in 1972. That was a genuinely historic moment.
It was the first time ever that the superpowers agreed to put a formal cap on their nuclear arsenals. They set specific limits on ICBMs, those are intercontinental ballistic missiles, and SLBMs, the ones launched from submarines.
These are the planet killers, basically, the really big ones.
Yes, but maybe the most interesting part of SALT-E, the most counterintuitive part, was something called the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM Treaty.
Wait, I don't get that. Why would you limit defense? If you're capping offensive weapons, shouldn't you want more defensive ones to shoot them down?
It seems totally backward, I don't.
Yeah.
But this is where you get into the really cold, cynical logic of the Cold War. Think of it like a duel. If one person shows up wearing a bulletproof vest, they might feel a lot more confident about shooting first.
Oh, okay, I see.
The ABM Treaty was designed to make sure neither side had that vest.
So by limiting defenses, you make sure everyone stays completely vulnerable to an attack.
Exactly. And that shared vulnerability is the whole idea behind mutual assured destruction.
Mad?
Mad dot. It's a terrifying concept, but the logic is, if you know for a fact that launching your missiles means you will be completely destroyed in the counterattack, you're probably not going to launch them in the first place.
Peace through terror, basically.
That's it. So the ABM Treaty said each country could only protect one or two sites with interceptor missiles. It guaranteed that total vulnerability, and that became the key to stability.
So after SALT-4, they went straight into working on SALT-2, trying to reduce things even further.
Right. The goal for SALT-2 was to limit new weapon technologies and cut back even more. The treaty was finally signed in 1979.
But it never actually became law in the U.S., did it?
It didn't. The U.S. Senate never ratified it. The political mood had shifted.
Why? What went wrong?
There's a mix of things. A lot of politicians in the Senate just didn't trust the Soviets. They were convinced the USSR was cheating or building new types of missiles that the treaty didn't cover properly.
So it was just pure suspicion.
Deep suspicion. They were afraid the Soviets were just using détente as a trick to get a military advantage. So because of that, Saltitano never got the votes.
Which seems like a huge failure.
Formally, yes. But here's the interesting part. Even though it wasn't official law, both the U.S. and the Soviets voluntarily followed most of its rules for years anyway.
Huh. So the idea behind it was still powerful, even if the politics failed.
It was. Which shows you that détente was about more than just treaties. It was also about trying to connect the two countries in other ways, like trade.
Right, the grain deals. The Soviet Union started buying massive amounts of wheat from American farmers.
Colossal amounts. The U.S. was hoping that if the Soviets depended on American food to avoid, famine, they'd be a lot less likely to risk a war. It was economics aimed at stability.
But that must have been controversial. Weren't people saying we were basically propping up our enemy?
Oh, absolutely. That was the constant debate. Are we helping them feed their people, which makes them stronger? Or are we making them dependent on us, which gives us leverage for peace? There were no easy answers.
And it went beyond food, right? There was scientific cooperation, too.
Yeah, they started sharing information on things like medical research and environmental protection, things that could help everyone, no matter what side of the Iron Curtain you were on.
But the most powerful symbol of all this cooperation had to be the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975.
I still find that incredible.
Oh.
After decades of being mortal enemies, they agreed to meet up in space. An American Apollo craft and a Soviet Soyuz craft literally docked together in orbit.
The level of trust that requires, the technical coordination alone is mind-boggling. And people all over the world watched on TV as the commanders, Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov, opened the hatch and shook hands.
It was just this incredible global message. If these two rivals could work together on something that complicated and that dangerous, maybe peace on Earth really was possible.
And around that same time, there was another big agreement. The Helsinki Accords.
Yes, signed in Finland in 1975 by 35 countries. This wasn't a formal treaty, but it had enormous political weight. And it had two main goals.
The first one was about stability. It basically had everyone agree to recognize the borders in Europe that were set after World War II.
For the Soviets, this was a huge win. It made their control over Eastern Europe seem, permanent and official.
But the second part,
Yeah, it was different.
The second part was a kind of time bomb for the Soviet system. By signing the Accords, every country, including the USSR, promised to respect basic human rights.
Freedom of thought, freedom of religion, things like that.
Exactly. And the Soviet system was built on controlling all of that. So by signing this, the Soviets basically handed a tool to their own citizens.
How so?
Because now, dissidents and activists in Eastern Europe could point to this international document that their own government had signed and say, you are violating our rights. It gave them a legitimate platform to demand change. So even as the Soviets got what they wanted on borders, they accidentally planted the seeds for future rebellion.
Precisely. Détente was messy. It was complicated. But for a while, it seemed to be working. But the tension underneath it all never really went away.
Right, because they were still competing everywhere else in the world, weren't they? Supporting opposite sides in conflicts in Africa, the Middle East.
All the time. And that just fed the suspicion back home. In the U.S., a lot of people thought the Soviets were just playing for time. And in Moscow, the leaders were paranoid that all this talk of human rights was just a way to weaken their control.
And that simmering tension finally just boiled over. In December 1979, this is where it all ends.
One single military action destroyed a decade of work. The Soviet Union sent tens of thousands of troops into its neighbor, Afghanistan.
They said they were just supporting the communist government there.
That's what they said.
That.
But the U.S. and the rest of the West saw it as a brutal, unprovoked invasion, a pure power grab.
And that was it. The trust, however fragile it was just gone. President Carter called it a profound betrayal.
The American reaction was swift and severe. They immediately stopped all grain shipments to the Soviet Union.
Which hurt American farmers, but was meant to punish the Soviets.
Right. They also cut off sales of high technology.
Yeah.
And then came the big one, the one everyone remembers.
The boycott of the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow.
Yes. The U.S. and many of its allies refused to go. For the Soviets, it turned what should have been a huge moment of pride into a global embarrassment. That invasion and the reaction to it was the end of detente.
The Cold War just snapped right back into a new, really tense phase.
It did. A new arms race, more confrontation, it all started again.
So if it just collapsed like that, what was the point? Did anything good come out of it?
I think so. It proved that diplomacy between enemies was possible. And the treaties, even the one that failed like SALT II, they created a blueprint for future arms control talks that happened later in the 80s.
So it laid some groundwork.
It did. But I think the key lesson is just how fragile peace really is. Trust between rivals is incredibly hard to build, and it can be destroyed in an instant by one aggressive act like the invasion of Afghanistan. Maintaining peace takes constant, exhausting effort.
So understanding detente really shows that talking to your enemies is always a better option than just standing on the brink of war.
I think the question it leaves us with is this. Once trust between global powers is broken by military force, how many decades does it take to repair the damage?
See you next time.